Hello, I'm Anthony. I'm in the middle of writing this piece of music at the moment. It's called The Machine. It's a fairly long, evolving piece of music. It's an instrumental. And what I really want to focus on today is the role that the percussion plays in this song. There's no traditional drum kit. I'm tired at the moment of the traditional drum kit. I'm kind of searching around for more world instruments. And Contact is really fantastic for this. There are some absolutely awesome libraries in Contact. This West Africa one plays quite a large role in this piece. But I don't want to kind of get too far ahead of myself. What I want to start off with is just play you a few bars of the entire thing, just deactivate the solo. The entire piece of music as it stands at this point towards the end of the piece. Then I'm going to pull all of the music away and we'll just listen to the rhythm, and I'll show you some of the what I think are interesting points about how this percussion lines come together. First things first though, this is what it sounds like in its entirety. Just the rhythm on its own, obviously. So let's talk about how I go about, first of all, constructing that percussion line and then mixing it into the song. How do I basically get it sounding good? So what we're going to do at this point is jump right back to the beginning of the piece, because the first of the percussion instruments to arrive is the calabash. This is basically like a hollowed out West African gourd, and that on its own sounds like this. So as you can see, I've already got that slightly balanced left. Before that becomes too offensive to your ears, the right hand side comes in with a dun-un. I love the dun-un. It's got that little kind of melodic tilt to it, and that slightly panned right. So right out of the gate, we've got some interesting stuff going on there. Those two instruments are going to be the bedrock of a large part of the percussive element of this piece of music. If I zoom out to show you the entire piece, it's something like 12 minutes long, maybe, I don't know exactly, 13 minutes long. And as you can see, the calabash and the dun-un play a very large role in that for the large part of the song. So this is the rhythmic backbone upon which the rest of the piece will sit. Now obviously we've just got the rhythm soloed when we were listening to those two pieces. I'll take it out of solo so that we can hear those two pieces in context. So at the moment there's not much going on musically. Like I say, it's a piece that evolves over time. So you can hear that percussion just sits in the background, keeping out of the way, never really kind of imposing itself. And throughout the entire piece I made a conscious decision that I didn't want lots of high frequency top end in this percussion. At no point do you really hear tons of fizzy stuff going on. That's predominantly reserved for the various keyboard effects. There's an absolute raft of keyboard sounds, blips, blops, all sorts of different things going on, and the percussion stays entirely out of the way of that. Let's solo the rhythm again, and we'll have a look at some of the EQ that's going on. Let's have a look at the EQ curves on each of these instruments. Now EQ is actually the only effect on either of the tracks. These instruments come basically completely dry. This is the native sound out of Contact. It was so good, I didn't feel the need to compress it or do any other work on it at all. But obviously, because I'm layering one percussion sound on top of another, I do need to be careful to make sure that they don't tread on top of each other. And so I do that predominantly with static EQ curves, really, really simple stuff. And here you've got some of my basic heuristics already on view. I quite strongly dislike, as most people do, the kind of 200 to 400 hertz region. It's typically called mud, which is a fairly accurate term for something that's almost entirely unpleasant. And it's just worthy of a little bit of examination. I think a bit of a discussion about mud is going to be super interesting. So I've got this imager. This is on the master bus. It's currently bypassed and not doing anything, but it allows me to focus in on a frequency range to hear what that's doing. So if I get that rhythm running again, then I'll control the overall volume down here. What I can do now is I can narrow a frequency band. So this is currently like 130 up to about 400. And I'm just going to solo that region and we'll listen to it on its own. Now there's very little interesting or pleasant in that zone, which is why a large part of it is sculpted away. What I'm going to do now is take these two EQ points, the individual nodes where I'm pulling away that mud. I'm going to disable those nodes so we basically hear more of that stuff. And you decide for yourself whether or not it enhances the rhythm at all. Thud, thud, thud. When I sculpt that stuff away, the rhythm is fundamentally completely untouched. Let's bring the rest of the frequency range back in and I'll do the same thing again. I'll A/B these two EQ nodes on their own, so now you can hear it in the context of the entire frequency range. It gets louder, but it gets no more pleasant. So everything that's going on in this region is effectively unnecessary almost all the time. Now you can't sculpt it all away because the stuff that's going on either side is really important. These two percussion sounds have a very important bass component around the 70 to 100 hertz region. We can't throw that away, and we can't just have some sort of sheer cliff because that's going to sound horrible as well. But sculpting as much of this away as you possibly can is almost always a good thing to do. It just cleans up the sound, because in that region, the 2 to 400 hertz region, even though lots of instruments are generating energy in that area, they're not actually doing anything particularly interesting. You don't hear it as a kind of a definitive bass sound that's typically 100 hertz and below, and you don't hear it as a particularly well-defined higher frequency sound either. It just falls in between, really unpleasantly in between these two stools. And so you'll see almost across the board in any EQ curve I draw, very often I'll sculpt this stuff away. And the way that I'll do it is I'll pull these nodes really way down until I'm negatively impacting the sound because I'm cutting away too much on either side, and then I'll bring it back. It is quite difficult to hear mud directly. You have to kind of hear the sound improve by its absence rather than focus on it specifically, or at least that's the way I find that I prefer to work with my mixing. So what I've basically done is I've just saved all of these energy points. This entire area under the curve, which is effectively pointless sound, can now be spent on more interesting areas. So basically imagine I've taken away all that rubbish and I've added it onto the lovely thick fat bass sound. I haven't increased the volume of the song because obviously, you know, when you add everything together, you can't go past, if you're releasing to Spotify or YouTube, it's going to be minus 14 loudness units. You can't go above that kind of absolute limit. And so by taking away energy over here and throwing it into a more interesting place, you see I've got a couple of little higher frequency bumps on the calabash. Let's have a listen to those. So I'll just solo the calabash on its own, get that running. Make sure the image is not doing anything. And now I'll just disable this entire EQ. So it just got duller, less interesting. So I'll give you a quick demo of that. I'm basically going to sweep through the frequency range, listening to really heavily accentuated spikes. And then when I find the bits that I like, I'll kind of pull it down to a more reasonable level. So that's the bit I want to accentuate, but I don't obviously want it this high. It's quite nice to take away as well, do it negatively. So it's just that little clap effect, just operating in that, what's that, 1.5 kilohertz. Really nice little range there. And this higher one, similar kind of thing, fizz. Don't want too much of it. Remember I said, don't want too much high frequency content, but I do want a little bit. And so they're really just salted to taste. So this EQ curve is effectively going to sit flat for the entire piece of music. I'm now going to control the volumes through automation, but I've basically sculpted the sound of the percussion. That's the way I want it to sound. And those two, the calabash and the dun-un, are going to be the kind of the architectural cornerstone of the whole thing. Speaking of volume automation, as you can see, as the piece evolves and more instruments are introduced, a little bit difficult to see this in context because we've not listened to the piece. I will release this once I've finished mixing it. So there's more keyboard lines coming in at the top end, at the green end, which is the melodic content. And as they come in, the percussion basically just steps out of the way to give the melodic content a little bit of room to breathe. So let's have a little sample of that. I'll disable all of the solos and we'll just listen to a few bars at this point in the song. So hopefully you didn't really notice that percussion drop off. You know, I'm just pulling away a couple of dB on either of those instruments, but because other sounds were coming in, they've got a couple of effects. This is where the bass guitar starts actually. So that's pulling a lot of the weight. So when the bass guitar kicks in, which is this, really simple at the moment, it's going to get more complex later, but it starts out with just those low bass sounds. I just want to clear a little bit of space for that to kind of bloom. And so I just pull the percussion down a little bit. This is just basic standard mixing stuff. But as we get on further into the song, at the moment I've only got 2 percussion pieces here. But it's really important to maintain that kind of the volume balance and the frequency balance so that the percussion's always doing something interesting if you want to listen to it, but it's never getting in the way if you don't want it to. Let's jump forward to the next interesting section. So we're going to introduce our third instrument now. This is the darbuka. Another, oh, this one's Middle Eastern actually. Like I say, these content libraries are just awesome. So this one sounds like this. Yep, fabulous too. Now when this comes in, this is the first really impactful percussion piece. That means I need to be fairly sparing with it, so I'm going to give it a few bars to do its thing and then it's going to get out of the way again. So let's put this into the context of the piece now. We'll listen to basically everything that's going from bar 93 for a while. So I've just got those little hits now. Again, none of this is ever being too intrusive. Didn't want the percussion to be like overbearing in this piece, but they are all doing really important jobs. Let's solo just the rhythm and listen to this on its own. Similar kind of thing, pulling away the muddy rubbish, accentuating the frequencies that I'm interested in. This has got quite a nice kind of timbale sound around the 500 Hertz. Take the EQ away. And back in. Accentuating the frequencies I'm interested in, pulling away the stuff I'm not interested in. These 3 percussion instruments on their own are probably the best demonstration of the overall negative impact of mud on a sound. Q-link these 3 tracks together so that I can enable and disable all 3 EQs together. And let's hear what happens when I pull all of those sculpted EQs down. Obviously there's other stuff going on, but we're really interested in listening to that muddy stuff. So there's almost no change to the dynamic quality of the sounds themselves, the percussion instruments themselves, apart from the fact that we've got very small EQ bumps here and there. They've maintained their fundamental character, but each one of those instruments has had a big chunk sculpted out of 250 to 400. You can't explicitly tell that, really. I can't kind of specifically identify that frequency range disappearing, except to say it just sounds cleaner and a little bit quieter, which then lets you kind of bump up your overall volume. Take the mud away again. Yeah, everything on both sides just sounds better now. And this is a representative of the kind of thing that's going on. By the time we get to the end of the piece, Groove Agent has elbowed its way into the conversation as well. Now I've decided to keep this track VST. My computer's actually able to handle processing it all, so I don't need to turn it into audio, but I have split out all of the individual audio tracks you can see, which allows me to then apply some EQ to each of them. So if we have a look at the congas and bongos section, which is basically everything that Groove Agent is contributing, got all of the individual tracks from cowbells, timbale, woodblock, conga, bongos, guiro. So there's 9 percussion instruments in all, and each one of them has their own EQ curve. Sometimes I'm pulling mud away. In this particular case, I'm actually throwing away entire unnecessary low end. This is a cowbell. It doesn't have low frequencies. I'm just accentuating the stuff that I want to hear. But in every one of these cases, when we look at the EQ curve, I'm doing something really simple. I'm just basically picking the bits that I want to hear and throwing away everything that I don't. This is not rocket science. If the percussion sound isn't doing anything in that area, then there's no reason for it to be there. This is the guiro, which operates in all of these upper frequencies, but I just wanted to accentuate a little bit. I suppose we need to hear some of this, don't we? Let's jump to 209, and here's the entire percussion section at this moment. So there's the guiro doing its thing. You basically just find the bits of squeak that you want more accentuated than the others. So in order to get all of that percussion stuff mixed together nicely, you've got 3 different things to think about. You've got your pan settings. Have a look in the mixer, you can see some fairly wide panning to keep these instruments out of the way of each other. You've got your volume automation, which is done with a combination of velocity control on the instruments themselves. You can see there's quite radically different velocities on the actual percussion sounds themselves, but then also the automation over the course of the piece is very dynamic. And then finally EQ sculpting, which frequencies for each of these sounds do I want to accentuate, and basically just kind of push those. So this is the timbale high. Let's see if we can catch this EQ curve and what I've done here. So that's what I'm pushing. And this second bump, little bit of that extra metallic ring, and again, once again, just sculpting away a little bit of the unnecessary rubbish down at the bottom. That probably should have been a low cut, actually. Kind of business. to throw away all of that stuff that we don't need. So just to wrap things up now, I'm going to give us 8 bars of just the rhythm. We'll listen to that on its own, hear all of those percussion sounds bed together, and then I'll unmute the rest of the music and we'll let it go to the end of the piece. Here we go. Hope you enjoyed this one. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.